One of the reasons we're so excited about Texas A&M's offense in 2025 is a new look wide receiver position. It's been a group at A&M that has just left a little bit more to be desired. It hasn't been terrible, but it really hasn't helped A&M get over the hump in recent seasons. But additions to the team, talk about key impact portal pieces, players stepping up into bigger roles, breakout player candidates. This position group has it all, and it's so exciting to look at. It's so exciting to talk about, and it's quite honestly one of the position groups I'm most looking forward to seeing in weeks 1 and 2. So today, we're going to break down the wide receiver position at A&M. This will be the first of our position group breakdowns. It's one of my favorite videos to make every year. We do it right before the season comes out, and it's always a time to get acquainted with the team, a time to look at each aspect of the team up close and personal, and see exactly what we can expect from these groups. But I'm not going to do these alone. Today, AggieStoday, Jaxon Callaway of On3 is going to help me out breaking down this room. I'm so excited to get him on. A lot of you guys have asked for him to come on before, so we'll have a lot of fun doing that, guys. Thanks for being here. Like and subscribe. Let's get right into this thing. All right, guys, there he is. AggieStoday. Jaxon Callaway has joined us on the channel. I know a lot of you have requested this guy over the years, and we finally got him. Jaxon, thank you so much for doing this, man. I think a lot of people know who you are, and you can plug your stuff and tell us all that, but I really want to hear your story, Jaxon. I know we've been seeing you kind of doing a lot of solo stuff, landed the gig at On3, but I kind of want to hear your story and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I've always been a guy that has always been like a fan page guy more so than a reporter growing up. I think I grew up with a Cowboys page, and I got that to like 30,000 followers. And so someone reached out to me and was like, "Hey, we're starting this kind of affiliation with college accounts. Is that something you'd be interested in?" I'm like, "Okay, maybe I'll do it." And so I started up an A&M one. Didn't know much. Really, I mean, being completely honest, I really didn't know what I was getting into. And I remember going to that 7 overtime LSU game. And on the way back out of that game, I was like, this is something I really enjoy. It's something that I felt more connected to than the Cowboys because I think that's something special with college football. I think that you feel so much more connected to what's happening. Um, and so I think the next day I started that page and I sold my Cowboys account as a 13-year-old and I moved into the A&M thing and it took off from there. I think that we were growing pretty steadily. And then I think, there were some guys like Damon Demas and Moose Muhammad who, joined the page and we kind of did some live streams and Johnny followed us and then it kind of just blew up from there. And now 7 years, down the line, here we are. And we're consistently growing and we're trying to continue to expand onto that.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I really saw you blow up with that 2022 class. I know that thing didn't really pan out on the field so much for A&M, but seeing that thing break down, seeing you in the forefront of that, that was really awesome to see. And you were a young guy when this all started. You were a teenager, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I just turned 20, so
Yeah.
we're getting there, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good early start to your career, man. I'm really excited to follow you guys. Make sure you follow him on all of his socials. Jaxon Callaway, you see the name. All right, but we're talking receivers today at A&M, and I think it's a really exciting time for A&M. And we're going to back up a little bit and talk about last year, maybe some of the stuff we've seen in the receiver room at A&M over the years. And I think we've had a few high highs, a few exciting moments with guys like Anais, with guys like Evan Stewart over the past few years. But really, the A&M receiver room has kind of been plagued with just this feeling of being a little bit vanilla, a little bit inconsistent. Yeah, you had your playmakers here and there, you had your big plays here and there, but nothing you could really ride home about consistently. So talking about last year, I think one of the big gripes about this offense, talk to the 12th man, the fan base, and really looking at this team, is that you really didn't have that consistent passing game for most of the year. And you had some guys, you had, Noah Thomas obviously was one of the premier, portal moves of the offseason. I think you had some good stuff from, Jade and Jabri, but what do you think happened there? Was it purely just a lack of separation? Was it maybe the quarterback shuffle? What did you think the downfall for the receiver room last year was, if you even want to call it a downfall?
Yeah, it was interesting to me because I think coming into the season, I think you knew Noah Thomas was your number one guy, but I think that they were really looking for that second guy. I think Keandre Lambert Smith was the guy they really thought they were going to get going into the season. And there was also the guy from Houston. And so I think they enter the season. Jabri Barber gets hurt right off the start. He misses some time. I think that, looking back, I think he may have been your second best receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Jade Walker played really well last year. But I think with him, there was just a certain ceiling. But I think towards the end, and you can especially, I think a timestamp you can put on it is right after that Le'Veon injury. I think at that moment things really changed because I think looking back, you have Marcel Reed, who's an extremely young quarterback. He didn't have the experience, and it kind of felt like the entire offense was being put on Le'Veon Moss. I think that allowed everyone to be kind of in a position where they were comfortable with the production they were giving. And so once Le'Veon Moss goes down, it kind of shifted into, all these guys saying, wait a minute, like, I don't think I can handle this much like, this isn't the workload that I can take. And, they tried to kind of battle that with Amari Daniels, but Amari Daniels was dealing with his own injury. And there wasn't much depth at the position. So I think looking back, I think that, you didn't have the talent at receiver that you need, especially in the SEC. But I also think that they were really thrown into a tough position that I don't think preseason anyone would have ever imagined would be possible.
Yeah, they started slinging the rock a lot because they had to. And that was, like you said, with the young quarterback that was Marcel. And on top of that, it was a year one system. So everything from the start was getting built on the fly. You're installing on the run in a year one. I mean, you also had Connor Wigman as your guy that the whole thing was built for. And you have a major stylistic change at quarterback. So you could say the receiver room maybe underperformed, but I think the whole thing was kind of set up for them not to be successful. But I did think they found a little bit of stuff down the stretch. You look at
Oh
the
yeah.
bowl game, and I really liked how they started targeting Noah specifically in
Hmm.
those corner routes. And they did it a little bit throughout the year, but it really started to hammer in that bowl game. And I think even versus Auburn, they got some RPO stuff. So what do you think the positives that can be carried over from last year now with some new characters we're about to talk about? What do you think some of the positives that can be brought over into the year happened late last year? What do you see there? What was good?
I think one thing that was intriguing to me was the shift and like you were mentioning with Noah, I think there was a massive shift down the stretch in Colin Klein kind of realizing what type of receiver is Noah Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And he left, so it doesn't mean much now, but I think now you can go back to the formula that was the early part of the season where they were running so much like motion and sweeps and screens to Noah Thomas. And I think if you can slot a guy in there like KC Concepcion, I don't know how they'd feel about this. And I know that Noah Thomas was a guy that was able to do that. But I think KC Concepcion, if you gave him those opportunities, I think you get drastically different results. I think that you can also bring over a large bit, like you bring the entire front five back, you bring your quarterback back, you bring your top three running backs back, top four actually. And I think from there, I think there's a large uh, there's a sense of comfortability for Marcel Reed. I think that he doesn't have to worry about, what is this guy like? What is this guy like? He has basically, for the most part, the entire offense known and memorized how we like to play. So going into a tough game like Notre Dame early in the season, I think you can rely on that run game that was so effective in the beginning of last year. You can rely on that to build momentum going into the game and really open things up in the passing game. And I think that also what you saw early with Theodore Ostrom, you could use that with Amari Niblack and you could expand on that. But I think that that's one thing I'm very intrigued at because I think they went away from the tight ends as the season went on. But I think if they're able to kind of go back to what they started with, they have a really good formula for what could work this year.
Absolutely. Much more balanced approach, getting healthy, bringing that experience back on the offensive line, and just the comfort level with Marcel. And talking about what I mentioned in the Auburn and the bowl game, it's like, well, now you're installing and Marcel's becoming more comfortable with some of the stuff you're asking of him. That's why I was always calling for more screens, short stuff. And you saw some of that later down the stretch. You saw them doing some of the end around stuff to Bussey, who's a guy who dealt with some injuries last year as well. And I think things kind of built out, and now you kind of merge the two, the running game and that stuff that you started to get that was positive in the receiver room. But again, losing all those guys from last year, I think you lose all of your top three pass catchers and more. But you rebuild it so beautifully in the portal, especially at the top.
Mhm.
KC Concepcion busted onto the scene 2 years ago at North Carolina State. Great player in so many different ways, a very versatile wide receiver. I'm so excited to watch this guy. I think he might be exactly what this offense needed. I want you to talk about exactly what A&M is getting in KC, maybe a little bit into his decision to choose A&M over some of the other programs that were courting him, because he was rightfully so one of the most sought after commodities in the portal last year.
Yeah, I think right as soon as he entered the portal, I think I got a text, and that he was one of the guys very similar to Mario Craver, and I think probably 90% of the guys that we heard this about A&M got, but it was this is a guy we need to have. We're already in contact, and so I remember talking to the agency, the family who has been very big on A&M, and they continue to do so, and they brought him down for the visit, which was something that, if you paid attention to the recruiting process, it was very hard to nail down a visit for him.
Yeah.
I think there was a time where he scheduled one and didn't make it. And so everyone's like, oh, no, this is over. He went to Bama. He went to Colorado. I think he went to Miami. And then I remember A&M taking another swing, and I got a text that he'd be coming on campus. So he makes his way to campus. And I think it's known now, but I think Marcel Reed was a driving factor in that decision. I think that when Mike Elko sat him down with Marcel Reed, I think that they were really able to go over a vision that they had, and I think it's something that's very plausible. And the game plan that they have for him is last year and probably even years before that, A&M has had guys that are very talented. They can make moves in open space, but I don't think they've had a true like elite explosive run after the catch guy. I think with KC Concepcion, I think you have that. I think you have a guy who can kill you in the underneaths. He can cross shoot, do whatever he needs to do. I think he's also a target downfield, but I think what's really going to I think his calling card is going to be taking these short passes that Marcel Reed can use, and I mean he's very comfortable with KC. Make the game easy for him. Make a pass out wide. He can turn that thing upfield and make a touchdown. I think you didn't have that last year. I think you had guys like Moose Muhammad, Jabri Barber, you had Cyrus Allen. None of those guys could really turn and make a play. I think with KC Concepcion, he's a playmaker, and A&M hasn't had somebody like that in a long time.
Yeah, I see basically a bigger version of Anias a little bit with the ability to become an elite, ball carrier a split second after making the catch. And you look at Marcel Reed and what he does well already, and this is not taking into account any possible Marcel development. I mean, he was a fine short to intermediate range passer. If you look at the
Yeah.
statistics and the numbers, that stuff is stuff you can live with. And a guy like KC, like you said, is a guy that can just make lemonade with those kinds of plays. You give him a crease, you let him square up against a defender, you give him any kind of time. He's the kind of guy that can turn a 5-yarder into a 30-yarder in an instant. And on top of that, he did a lot of things for NC State, more so than just being a receiver, more so than even being involved in motion and end arounds. I mean, he was a guy that lined up at Wildcat. He was a guy that threw a touchdown pass his freshman year. He was a guy that took handoffs in the backfield. And maybe our ultimate vision for Terry Bussey is what you're going to get in KC Concepcion now, ready to go. So it's really, really exciting to see that kind of playmaker, and maybe the most clear wide receiver one A&M has had a long time with that versatility. Because Noah, yes, you would say he was the lead receiver, but I think he had a very clear and defined role.
Mm-hmm.
I think KC can do a lot of things, and he might be the most clear-cut wide receiver one A&M's had since maybe Christian Kirk. It feels like that level of impact and that level of let's get the guy the ball in as many ways as possible. And it's so exciting. But he won't do it alone, because you obviously bring guys back, but you also brought in a Mario Craver in the portal. And you talk about guys that Marcel Reed would love to use in that short range. Craver's a guy that, he's a smaller guy, but he is less, bound by gravity in that. And that shows in his ability to play and his ability to just be able to move around, cut either direction on a dime. How is a guy like Mario Craver going to help Marcel Reed out in that slot position?
Yeah, that's the guy that I think I'm most excited for. I think KC Concepcion brings a lot of talent, and I think plays a very exciting brand of football. But I think Mario Craver rises the ceiling of this offense 10 times because I think we've talked about it with KC. We didn't have a guy that could take a catch from 2 yards out and take it all the way down the field for 70 yards. With Mario Craver, he won't necessarily do much of that for you. And I think that they've been working on getting him more involved in the intermediate game, but he is one of the most dangerous deep threat guys in the country. He was extremely productive as a limited role freshman at Mississippi State because of on-field stuff. I think that he was the perfect addition in this offense where, you have to worry so much about what's happening in the backfield that you also have KC Concepcion out wide. He can take it from anywhere. Terry Bussey can come in motion. He can take a snap directly. He can go make a deep ball, whatever. But then you also have to worry about Namari Niblack running a route, Theo running a route. But Mario Craver is probably the most dangerous guy on that offense just because you have to focus on all these other people first. And you have an elite receiver that can make these type of plays out wide. I think he's the guy, when we talk about X factors. I don't know if he's the X factor of the offense, but I think if he has, a year that blows away everybody, I think that would be the difference between a 8-4 or a 9-3 to 10-2 or 11-1.
100%. He has that upside. He's coming in after a freshman year, so a young guy with his best ball, you would think ahead of him. And you're right, he's not the focal point. He's a piece in an offense, and he fits it very, very well. And you're talking about his big playability. I think, and he's been in the SEC. He's seen it all. I mean,
Mhm.
he's been to Georgia, he's been to Texas, he's been to Tennessee, played A&M. One of his best games of the year is against A&M, but against Texas and Georgia and all those secondary pieces that they have and put in the league all the time. 3 receptions between the two games, but 40-yard average per catch. And that's just a big play guy. And you just get 1 or 2 of those a game, and that changes your game. That changes the
Mhm.
outlook. And he fits so well with what they're trying to do. But you have these two at the top, and they're going to be the headliner. But everyone's thinking about Terry Bussey. You touched on him. And getting into year two, freshman year last year, big shifts for him on multiple levels, going from high school to college, not an early enrollee, getting in later, coming in as a DB, obviously quarterback in high school, mid camp, moves to receiver. You had some good stuff from Bussey. It wasn't a consistent year. I think he dealt with some injury stuff. He dealt with an injury before, getting into college, so that those crucial years of development were somewhat stunted. But now, a year into college, around these weapons that we just talked about, with all the other stuff that's on this offense. I mean, what did you see from Bussey last year, and where do you see him growing this year?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I don't think it was ever a consistent production. And you can blame that on a lot of things. I think him
Sure.
coming from high school and not being a full time receiver, I think that hurt obviously. And then obviously when he got here, he was banged up. They didn't really know exactly what the plan was. And so you put him at receiver early in the season. You saw some plays. He made plays early in the year. But I think one thing that stuck out to me is that he just didn't seem comfortable.
Hmm.
I think that he was still questioning, every move he made, and is it, I think he was thinking about it all too much. But it's also a very hard system to learn. Playing receiver is not an easy thing to do, obviously. But I think at the end of the season, you started to see some pretty drastic improvements with Terry Bussey. You saw it early in the Texas game. You saw it all game and during the SC game. I think he became a pretty comfortable receiver in that SC game. Was one of the leading receivers in that game, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And he looked like a completely different player. He was more confident, and he looked like he was back up to 100%. He's a guy that this season, with a full off season of knowing what the plan is, knowing the playbook, building on to already a really impressive talent that he is. I'm expecting him to be really good this year, and we can discuss how it's going to get split between him, KC, Ashton Bethel, Craver, but I think he's going to be a guy that's going to get his regardless. I think he's going to be very elite in the return game as well. But I think he's another guy that if he's someone that can get rolling here early in the season, A&M might have a really dangerous offense.
Yeah, that trio at the top. And in the way you can't really zero in on any one of them because you have the trio, you have Marcel Reed's ability, both run and pass, you have the running back room and the offensive line. It really seems like they can all play off of each other really well. But as interesting and as fun as that top three is, you touched on a couple of them. There's some level of uncertainty about exactly how this rotation is going to shake out. I couldn't tell you who the fourth receiver would be in this rotation right now because you got a bunch of options there. And this is college football, right? You have your guys at the top that you expect stuff from, but someone always steps up. So as it stands right now, about 3 days into camp, with the little bit of rumblings we've gotten some, I would say maybe stock rising for a guy like TK Norman. But who do you see rounding out this rotation? Because usually you're going to want to go 5 or 6 deep. Who do you think the main candidates are, and what do you think we can see from those guys?
Yeah, I think Ashton Bethel Roman is kind of my guy I'm looking for at that wide receiver four. He had a really good spring ball. I think you also look at Jerome Miles. He's still battling back from that ACL injury, but he posted videos the other day, and I've even been told that he looks really good. I think he's still kind of um, just breaking and change of direction. All that stuff is slowly coming back. But I think by the time the season will roll around, he'll be able to play in a limited capacity. And I think as you enter that conference play, he can be a big contributor for you. And then, like you mentioned, I think TK Norman is a guy who could see some early playing time. That was a guy when we were recruiting him. I was like, I've never heard of this kid. I talked to guys that were in Georgia, and they're like, this guy's pretty real. They didn't know how he translated to college, but they're like, this guy is incredibly impressive. And so he gets here in the spring, and spring ball, we heard about him a good bit. And then, this week we've heard about him even more. That's a guy I'm really excited for. I think Isaiah Williams, someone who was in apologize. Elko's first class. I think he's another guy who's impressing, but I think those are probably the few guys that I'd look at in terms of filling out that receiver rotation.
Yeah, Isaiah Williams had himself a great spring game. I think he showed us a little bit of something there with his ability to, make those contested catches, something that maybe surprised me a little bit. But I think ABR was a guy that was on the cusp of cracking that rotation last year. It seemed like maybe
Mhm.
he was an injury away last year, and I think he has a great chance to be there. And he brings something that the top of this room doesn't necessarily have, and that's a little bit more size. I think ABR is listed at 6'1", Jerome Miles at 6'2". Do you think when you look at this day one starting trio at receiver, maybe you start in 12 personnel, who knows what they do, but when you're looking at three receivers out there, is it as clear cut as, okay, just throw Bussey, Craver, and KC out there? Or do you think that when you're gonna kind of in your base package, you want to throw a bigger guy out there? How do you think that shakes out? Do you think they're going to want to prioritize having one guy with length, whether that's a Jerome Miles once he gets up to speed? I think TK is listed at 6'1". Or do you think
Mhm.
it's just cut and dry? Go with your three and build it from there.
Yeah, that's a very intriguing question, actually. I think, when you're looking at it, in my head, I think you have a clear cut three and you can roll those guys out there. But I think at the same time, I think Amari Niblack is a name that, and I think we're going to talk about him later, but I think that's one guy that is very intriguing to me because he's dropped weight this offseason.
Okay.
He wasn't a big guy, but he is probably the most athletic, 6'5", 6'6". I don't know exactly how tall he is, but he's a tall dude. He's as athletic as they come that size. I'm curious to see if he is someone, uh, I'm trying to think of his name, but he plays both tight end and receiver. Because as a tight end, he won't block.
Right.
I'm not gonna sit here and tell you he'll block. He won't block.
That's been the problem. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, you bring him in, and we run a lot of 12 personnel, so I think that they'll be fine. And I think bringing in Borkheischer was a
Yep.
huge move. Um, but I think he's a guy that they could play at receiver in those scenarios, and you wouldn't even notice that it's a tight end playing receiver.
Yeah, we'll talk about it now because I think you bring great versatility in this tight end room with a guy like Borkesher, a guy like Micah Riley. I think those guys kind of trend to be stronger blockers when you're looking at that tight end spectrum. And obviously Theo can be that wild card that elevates that room if the culmination of his years of development coming from Sweden football pans out this year. But with that versatility, it leaves room for a very defined role for a guy like Amari Niblack because we talked about Noah Thomas being that clear cut inside the 30 red zone threat, especially down the stretch of the year when you just said, okay, this is what he does. We're going to target him this way over and over. And I could really see that being Amari Niblack. And he's a guy that hasn't really found his footing at college. It seems like every year he's on the breakout players candidate list. He's always there, whether it was Bama or Texas. And last year, just something called Gunnar Helm happened, and he didn't have his shake of it. But you're absolutely right. He fits exactly what this offense needs. He is that red zone threat. I could even see him being a safety valve for a big target, maybe on some shorter routes for Marcel, maybe a get out of jail free card. Because that guy, if you get a linebacker on him with his weight loss that you're telling me about, his athleticism that's already well documented, he could be a guy that could just be a first down machine for A&M.
Mhm.
So I really like what you can do with the tight end room. I know that's kind of dipping into O-line, wide receiver territory, but it's worth talking about. And then, of course, let's just, talking about personnel, we'll finish with Theo because Theo's a guy, you talk about maybe the wild card or the X factor aspect. He's a guy that had ups and downs last year, right? Early in the year, you think about the Florida game, had that big target, that big touchdown. But you think about later in the year, the drop versus Auburn and a couple of maybe just, subpar blocking performances at times. What do you think the upside for Theo is this year? Because I think he's a guy that might be getting slept on with some of the additions on this offense. But if he pans out, you look at his body right now. I mean, this dude looks NFL ready body wise.
Yeah, that tight end room is very intriguing. I think that's one name that's been slept on a little bit, because I think last year you had too much of guys who were serviceable at basically everything, but they weren't great at
Yeah.
anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think Theo was the only guy who could really hold his ground. And I think this year it's exciting to look at him because I think there's so many different personnel options that they can go to in order to get him the ball. But he's also a guy that you can put next to Borkheischer, and you don't have to worry about that side of the field, like any pressure coming from that side, because they're just two guys who are, you know, strong enough to handle any defensive tackle in the country, I'd say. And I think also with him, you get that versatility that I don't think you have in that room necessarily. I think that you have a bunch of guys that have a defined role. Like you said, I think Amari is a guy that will be receiving. Borkheischer is a guy that will be blocking for the most part. Micah will be blocking for the most part. But I think Theo brings that dual threat as a tight end
Oh yeah.
that can be so valuable to the offense.
Yeah, man, it's really exciting stuff. Well, all right, man. I think we covered the main personnel stuff. I'll end with a kind of a fun question for you. Over under 1,000 all-purpose yards. KC Concepcion, man. He could do it, man. He could do it. There's going to be
He
an
can do
equal
it.
share out there, but if he is the wide receiver one that gets utilized what we think he can, what do you think?
It's a good question. I'm trying to. I mean, I think they're going to use him in the run game. I just have a hard time believing they won't. And if it's anything that we saw in the spring game, he's going to be a guy they target a lot. I think he can do it because I think even last year they had the potential to do it. There was just no run after the catch. I mean, you virtually got spotted where the guy caught the ball.
Yeah.
So I think I'd probably lean towards I think he can do it.
Yeah, he's a stat pattern, not in a bad way, but just the
Mm-hmm.
way he plays the game, turning those things into big plays. He'll help Marcel Reed's numbers out for sure.
Yeah.
It's going to be a hell of a year for the receiver group. There's a really good chance this is the resurgence of the receiver room at A&M. A lot of that's going to go on Marcel Reed, but again, these guys complement what we already know about Marcel really, really well. So it's a super exciting room, and I can't wait to watch them play. It might be the room I'm most excited to see for the first time come UTSA in just a few weeks. Well, all right, Jaxson, man, it was a blast, and it's not the only one we're gonna do. We're gonna do a linebacker preview as well because if I have Jaxson for a video, I got to keep Jaxson as long as I can because I know you guys have been asking for him. But tell them where they can find you one last time, man. I'll get you out of here.
Yeah, we're AggieToday on all socials: TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere where you get content at. We're on there.
All right, man. It was a good time, and I'll see you in the next one. Gig 'em.
Perfect. See you then.